Welcome to a world with limitless possibilities. A world where pain and suffering are matched only by the sounds of those who endure it. Welcome to your nightmare.
Welcome to your nightmare.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Nightmare. For tonight's story, I have a tale for you called The Patron of the Unfinished. I do hope you all enjoy. The silence in apartment 4C wasn't the absence of sound. It was a physical weight. It was the kind of silence that had teeth. Elias sat at his mahogany desk, the only heirloom he hadn't sold to fund a life that had eventually stalled out. Before him lay a single sheet of cream-colored stationery and a fountain pen. He had spent years writing technical manuals, dry, soul-sucking instructions on how to assemble things that would eventually break. Now, he was writing the manual for his own disassembly. It wasn't sad. That was the misconception people had about the great exit. They expected a crescendo of tears, cinematic breakdown. For Elias, it was simply math. He had calculated the sum of his days, subtracted the joy, factored in the mounting debt of his spirit, and the remainder was zero. He unscrewed the cap of his pen. The ink was a deep, midnight blue. To whom it may concern, he began. Then the floorboards in the hallway groaned. Elias froze. He lived alone. He had no pets. The deadbolt was engaged, and the chain was slid into its slot. He waited. His heart stammered a rhythm that felt far too energetic for a man intending to stop it. It sounded like someone pulling a heavy, wet sack across the hardwood. It stopped right outside his study door. Elias stared at the handle. It didn't turn. Instead, a thin gray vapor began to seep through the gap between the door and the frame. It didn't dissipate. It coiled on the floor like a sleeping snake. "Go away," Elias whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm busy." A voice replied from the other side. Not a voice really, but the sound of dry leaves skittering over a gravestone.
"Busy leaving? Or busy being taken?"
Elias stood, knocking over his chair. He backed toward the window, but the room felt different. The corners didn't seem to meet at 90-degree angles anymore. The walls were stretching, the ceiling dipping low like a heavy belly. "Who are you?" The door didn't open. It simply ceased to be a barrier. A figure stood there. It was tall, too tall for the 7-foot frame of the door, forcing it to hunch in a jagged, broken posture. It wore a suit that looked like it was woven from funeral shrouds, and where its face should have been, there was only a vertical slit that pulsed with a dull, bruised light.
"I'm the patron of the unfinished. You seek to end the story before the final chapter is written. That creates a vacuum, Elias. And nature abhors a vacuum."
The entity stepped into the room. With every moment, the air grew colder, smelling of ozone and wet earth. It reached out a hand, fingers like spindly white roots, and touched the suicide note. The ink on the page began to bleed, swirling into shapes that shouldn't exist. I have nothing left, Elias defied, though his knees shook. You can't take what's already gone.
You have your ending. A man who dies by his own hand thinks he is reclaiming his agency, but you are merely a leak in the reservoir of existence. I am here to plug that hole.
The entity leaned in, the vertical slit on its face widening. Inside, Elias didn't see flesh or bone. He saw a kaleidoscope of other faces, thousands of them, frozen in the exact moment of their own final acts. Their eyes were wide, their mouths locked in silent screams.
If you leave now, you don't go into the light. You don't go to the dark. You go into the collection. You become a stitch in my coat, forever replaying the last 30 seconds of your breath, unable to finish the exhale.
The room began to dissolve. The walls of the apartment fell away, revealing a vast gray plain under the sky, the color of a deadeye. Millions of these patrons wandered the waste, each draped in heavy twitching robes made of human souls. Elias looked down at his hand. He was still holding his pen. What do I do? He cried out.
Finish the work. Not the note, the life. You think your story is over because the plot is hard. A story only ends when the protagonist has nothing left to learn. You still have so much to suffer, so much to see, so much to give the world before your marrow is dry enough for my harvest.
The entity lunged, its cold fingers wrapping around Elias's throat. It wasn't trying to kill him. It was forcing air into him. It was a reverse drowning. The sheer terrifying weight of existence was shoved back into his lungs. Every regret, every sharp memory, every ounce of potential pain he had tried to escape. Elias woke up on the floor of his study. The sun was shining, casting a sickly yellow light across the room. The chair was still overturned. The cream-colored stationery was on the desk. He crawled to the desk and looked at the paper. The words, "to whom they concern," were gone. In their place, written in the same midnight blue ink, but in a script that wasn't my own, were 4 words.
Not yet. I'm watching.
Elias picked up the pen. His hands were shaking, but the math had changed. The remainder was no longer 0. It was a terrifying, infinite debt. He realized then the true horror. He wasn't allowed to leave. He was a prisoner of his own heartbeat, guarded by a monster that fed on the slow burn of a life fully lived. He tore the note into 1,000 pieces and began to wash the ink from his hands. It wouldn't come off. Underneath his fingernails, the blue remained, a permanent stain, a mark of the patron. He walked to the window and looked down at the street. People were waking up, starting their cars, living their mundane lives. And behind every shadow, in the corner of every eye, Elias could now see them. The tall, hunched figures in funeral shrouds, waiting for a story to falter, waiting to catch a soul before it hit the floor. He would live, not because he wanted to, because he was too afraid to see what happened to those who tried to quit the game early. The silence in the apartment was gone. Now, there was only the sound of his own breathing, heavy and loud, like a clock ticking down a century he was forced to endure. That's all for this episode of Nightmare. As always, if you enjoy the stories that you are hearing, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you have any story suggestions, please reach out to me at nightmarepod@gmail.com. And until next time, sleep well.